Welcome to the Biz and Tech Podcast. My name is Blake Dowling. I'm the CEO of Aegis Business Technologies. Today we're joined by Ryan Cohn, EVP and partner at Sachs Media, one of the leading PR companies not only in the state of Florida, but in the nation. Pleasure to have you today, sir.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
It's an exciting day. We're coming off the Tallahassee Chamber of Commerce Conference, which I attended for the past few days. We're looking at elections. We're looking at football season. Things are rocking post-pandemic. What's new with you, Ryan?
Oh, a little bit of everything. It's, say usually summer months tend to be slower at Sachs Media. I think I gave up on that, though, a few years ago. Probably since the pandemic, it's just been, whirlwind every day, all year long.
I concur. We used to have a slow season in July. That has since ended. Now, I think our only slow season would be considered the week between Christmas and New Year's. However, disclaimer, most people want to get their IT work done that's
understandable, yep.
That gets in the way of business. They want to get it done all during that week. So that's a lot of fun.
For us, that's exactly the same. I mean, we've now started closing for that final week of the year, but inevitably there's one or two campaigns, especially if we're coming into an early session where, it's boom, like a rocket straight out of the holidays. Inevitably, there's at least one or two clients that comes on board and says, okay, we need to get everything done over these final 2 weeks of December, and then it's a mad dash.
Absolutely. So tell us about your background. You had your own business prior to your time with Sachs Media.
Yep.
Tell us how you got started. Where did you go to school? What are your passions? Where are you from?
Absolutely.
Sounds like a long question.
So hopefully not that long of an answer. But I actually grew up in Fort Lauderdale, down in South Florida. Came up to Tallahassee like so many others to go to FSU. Picked up a couple degrees there and had a great job lined up. And then the recession hit. Right at that front end, job that I had lined up disappeared in a hiring freeze. And I found myself trying to decide what I was going to do next. I ended up talking to a friend of mine who was an entrepreneur, small business owner in Tallahassee. And he said, well, what are you thinking you want to do? And I said, well, maybe I'll go back to school, get my MBA. And he said, why? I said, well, I've got a lot of ideas for business, and I would love to have essentially a lab to experiment with business ideas, see what works, what doesn't. He said, you may want to consider starting your own business. That way, if you're successful, you're the one who benefits. And that made a lot of sense to me. And so I said, okay, I'm going to try this business ownership, entrepreneurship thing. Started my own social media marketing firm. This was right in the early days of Facebook and social media. Businesses were just starting to try to figure out what they were doing, if they needed to have a presence, how to do it all. So I started it myself. Initially, like so many small businesses, I think there's this perception of business owners that, you start a small business and you're just going to jump right into it full time. But of course, you still have to pay the bills and everything. So, I held down sales jobs. I remember worked at a furniture store for about a month or two. And,
nice.
Worked in an apartment complex and everything, realizing, okay, you got to have that balance of making the money to keep going, but also having the brain power, not being exhausted every day, so that I could also work on the business and go out and sell and do the work. And then I hit one day where I signed my first big client.
Nice.
And that was my, yes, this is going to be a success. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this full time, and it's going to work out. And that was a monumental day for me.
What was the client?
Can't share that one. It was in the legal world.
Fair enough.
But it was sizable enough to where I was able to go full time. Got my own office space and started, as we would then bring on more and more clients, hiring up, and ended up after 4 years from that point, had 2 offices, one in Tallahassee, one in Fort Lauderdale, and about 14 full-time employees.
That's awesome.
So that was really exciting, quite a path.
That's a great journey and a great story. And you certainly made a splash in the community. As I remember seeking your expertise on a particular issue we were having, we were going through our rebrand, which really changed our company because Aegis Computer Services was our old business, which people knocked on the door for residential assistance. Help me with this virus. And that was not the kind of business we were chasing. We were going after corporate accounts, private sector accounts. And the subtle change, I know you know this world better than most, the subtle change of Aegis Business Technologies made all the difference and attracted the kind of customers we were looking for and allowed us to push the brand forward. And when it came to making sense of the wild, wild west of early Facebook, you were obviously an expert in that space. Our old web developer, I won't mention you by name, sir, said, just put a post up and point people to your new Facebook page. Start over. And I thought that idea seemed ludicrous. So I sought a second opinion, which was yours. And you said, well, let me take a look at it. And then you said, let me make a phone call. And poof, our Facebook page was changed to Aegis Business Technologies. And I'll never forget you didn't send me a bill. So thank you, Ryan.
You're welcome. It's sometimes, it's helpful to have those relationships. And I'll tell you, I started working with Facebook in a business sense back in May of 2007. So I think I'm coming up on 15 years working with Facebook, which is now Meta.
Right.
And, back then it was, like the wild, wild west. No, when you actually were able to pick up the phone and talk to someone, or, back in the days of phones,
right.
Had direct contacts, suddenly you could, snap your fingers and make something happen. And just understanding the ins and outs of how it all works, where it's come from, where it's going, it's definitely provided me with a really interesting picture of the landscape.
Absolutely. So that company was acquired. Is that correct?
Yep. So that firm was What's Next Marketing.
Right.
Always loved the name.
It is awesome.
And so, interestingly, though, Ron Sachs, who founded Sachs Media, at that time it was Ron Sachs Communications, he approached me one day, had a meeting, and he said, love what you're doing, and we'd be interested in merging. And looked at him, and I said, that's very kind of you, but I like what we're doing. And I turned him down. Fast forward 6 months, business ownership is a mix of ups and downs, as you know. It's, I think a lot of people think it's, that straight line from point A to point B. In reality, it's a whole bunch of squiggles everywhere. And it's a big
squiggle.
Oh, yes.
Well
it's
said.
A journey. And I had one of those, 3 steps forward, 2 steps back type moments. One day I got the call that not only did I lose my second largest client, but third largest also had budget cuts. And in one fell swoop, lost 2 of my 3 largest clients. That was pretty devastating. That was the first time I'd ever experienced that. And unfortunately, I had to lay off 8 people in one day. I will never forget that feeling. I actually took a selfie, probably one of the first selfies I ever took, just to remember that feeling. Remember the low point. Never want to wish any business owner that feeling of having to lay off 8 people on any business owner, because it's horrible.
Understood.
But it was that moment where I said, okay, I'm ready for the next step. I can either build it all back up. I can relocate the business, which is something that I seriously considered because we tended to compete against a lot of companies, a lot of other firms in places like New York or DC. Or I can look at the opportunities here. And I remember I put together an Excel spreadsheet that had all the pros and cons of, what I should do. And interestingly, I had one row that I added for, it was a little bit more personal life.
Right.
And I just started dating this wonderful woman who I thought, wow, there could be something here. I feel that spark. I'm intrigued. I want to know where this goes. And I added some extra points in that category, and it tipped the scales to staying in Tallahassee. And I'm glad I did, because that woman's now my wife, and we've been together for 8 years.
Congratulations.
So thank you. That was definitely the right move.
Awesome.
And so I called up Ron and I said, "You interested still?" And he said, "Absolutely." And I'll tell you, I'm really big about teaching and coaching and mentorship. And I asked him one thing. I said, "Ron, if we go through with this, I know social media, I know digital marketing, but you are the best, bar none, the best in terms of professional communications and messaging in the state of Florida. Will you take me under your wing and will you teach me that?" And he said, yes.
Awesome.
That was such a great decision. That was 10 years ago. We rolled What's Next Marketing into Sachs Media. And since then, I mean, I started in as basically leading the social media and digital practice. And now I'm a majority partner in the business. And I love where we're going. And it's been 27 years. I've been with the firm for 10 of those 27. And we're looking forward to the next 20 plus to come.
Well, congratulations. You have a team of heavy hitters. Ron's a legend. Michelle is awesome. Lisa, Drew, amazing company. Congratulations on the successes in the long run you all
Thank you
have had.
so much.
A quick plug for Magic Mind. If you're not familiar with Nootropics, this is a supplement company out of Venice, California. I had one right before the show, and it's a coffee supplement. Why don't you check out Magic Mind if you are into something new and don't just want to drink 2 pots of coffee every day. That's where I was. So that's my plug for the awesome people in Venice, California. So let's talk about the metaverse. Let's talk about virtual reality. What are you seeing out there in the space? I try to write my tech columns for Florida Politics and the Democrat about the latest and the greatest. And, you know, sometimes they're on point, sometimes they're not. What are you seeing in those spaces particularly?
So for a lot of years, I was of the camp of augmented reality was where everything was going. You know, you have AR, you have virtual reality, VR, and with augmented reality, that's very much, you know, we're going to take that technical informational layer and put it on top of the existing world.
Right.
Computing in your glasses, seeing, okay, I'm driving and up here on the windshield on the right side, there's Starbucks a mile down, and here's their specials and everything, and it layers on top. I think that's still coming, but I'm much more now intrigued by the prospects of virtual reality, because people, I think, you know, there's this view of virtual reality that people have that's very much, okay, this, as many of these new technologies start, it's about gaming. It's right. That fun, it's some of the socialization, but we're starting to see the potential of virtual reality in other parts of life. For instance, earlier this year, we helped a client in the educational world launch the world's first virtual reality charter school for awesome. K through 12. And it was cool to hear about that technology, but then they came into our office with the Oculus headsets and said, all right, we're going to do the demo. You need to feel this. And I put it on, and for the next hour, I was immersed in this educational metaverse that was so cool. I mean, we started in a lecture hall like a lot of schools or colleges would have. And I found myself walking all around, sitting in different chairs, going out, trying to open doors and going into hallways just to experience this. And then we switched to a lesson about history.
Oh,
but
wow.
Instead of being in the classroom, in this
right.
lecture hall, our classroom then became the Coliseum. And to be in that immersive environment, learning about this subject in history and seeing it, it became more tangible. I was fully immersed in it. And I'll tell you, I mean, as someone who I'm pretty close to addicted to my phone, never once in that hour did I feel the desire to pick up my phone and check messages or do anything on that. It was just such an eye-opening experience to know that this is in reality just going to open up worlds of opportunities, whether it's for school or think police fire training exercises or exploring new places. I mean, this client is now starting to roll out field trips. Think, you could take, instead of having to take a whole bunch of middle school students and send them on an airplane to DC, we can just have class in a matter of minutes in the Oval Office.
That's amazing.
And feel that. And, of course, it's not going to replace the in-person experiences, the travel, and because that real world is so important. But to be able to supplement it with a virtual component, there's a lot of promise here. It's not going to all happen in one day, but we're going to see some really interesting opportunities for advancement in the next few years that are just going to blow your socks off.
The applications in science, marine biology, astronomy, I mean, endless. That's very interesting. Thank you for sharing that. Moving on to the landscape of privacy, trust, and transparency. Obviously, that's a huge part of everything we do online. It's a wide open space. What are your thoughts going on in those areas?
I think, we go through these periods of history. I love history. And I love watching sort of the sociological patterns that emerge over time. And when you look back at how people have interacted with media over really generations, there was this very big push toward mass media during the 20th century. It used to be that people lived in their neighborhoods and, the media that they consumed were very local neighborhood type or in many cases ethnic or cultural based newspapers. Then radio started coming around, and you can't really just target a radio signal to one little community back then. So they started to put out radio content that covered a more vast population that was relevant to more people. And then you had broadcast television and, 3 stations. Well, you can't have, each neighborhood having their own hour of content.
Right.
So you create sitcoms or news programs that are relevant for as many people as possible. And that's how we got our communication for so long. It was the one talking to the many.
And remember, it ended at midnight?
Mm-hmm.
I'm a little older than you. I remember that. Like, no, TV's off. That's not a thing anymore. Go ahead.
And then, of course, then cable emerged, and suddenly you had your MTV, and CNN was around the clock, not just at midnight, but around the clock news.
Right. ESPN.
And recently we've gone into this phase of very personalized content and very much on your schedule. It's funny, I've got 2 daughters, or my oldest, Samantha, is 6. And she's grown up with everything is just streaming and on demand. And we'll take her to a hotel on vacation that still has more traditional, cable TV. And she'll be watching something and she'll say, okay, hey, I've got to run to the restroom. Can you pause it? And we say, well, no, we can't pause this TV. And she says, okay, well, I guess we'll just rewind it when I get back. So, well, no, we can't do this either. And she gets upset because she expects everything to be controlled by her and personalized, and that she has that full, like I said, control over everything.
Right.
All of her media. And that's the reality that we're starting to see more of today. Everything is focused on us. We also see there's this interesting trend throughout history of, society shifts back and forth between being more community focused versus being more individualistic. And it's usually those moments throughout history that frequently are wars, when there's maybe a common enemy, where America tends to be more community focused.
Sure.
And then when that doesn't happen, we become more individualistic. And you see it not just in terms of, media consumption, but in subscriptions, in membership, in, churches or civic groups. They go back and forth during those periods of time. 9/11 was really the most recent time when we all kind of came together in a communitarian sense. But for the last 20 years, we've shifted much more toward individualistic. And I think our media consumption, the content that's out there and how we all communicate has really reinforced that. And what that's done, though, is it's created a crisis of trust.
Oh, yeah.
We don't trust our institutions nearly as much as we used to, but we still do trust our tribes. That's the whole, we see, we at Sachs Media, we do a lot of in-house polling, and we'll ask these questions of, okay, well, what's your approval of Congress? People hate Congress. But then we ask, well, do you approve of your congressperson? And they say yes. Typically, especially if they're of the same party, but
right.
Typically they will be much more likely to be satisfied with their own representative versus Congress as a whole. And that's what it comes down to in so many cases. We're a lot more focused on tribalism now, and content, whether you like it or not, has to be a lot more nuanced, and it's about the quality of the engagement, of the connection and the relationships we build versus trying to reach the masses. That's why Oprah doesn't have her show anymore where she was reaching 25 million people with some episodes. Now it's about the O Network.
Right.
And maybe she'll reach 250,000. But it's that relationship, the buying power, and everything that comes from that enhanced engagement that suddenly companies need to pay much more attention to today.
Well said. I've tried to become unreachable by corporate America the past few years as I get older and you get more set in your ways. And your daughter, that's a great analogy to what we all are used to. I'm watching The Offer now, the making of The Godfather, which is a fascinating program on Amazon. But I don't want commercials, and I don't want to be exposed to anything else. Magic Mind is a great example of reaching me via Instagram. During the pandemic, I added a bunch of interesting characters to my social media world during that time, as we all found new things to do, new things to follow, new passions, new interests. But whether it was music or new tropics, awesome. So let's talk about reshaping the media landscape. What did you see? What have you seen then and now? It's obviously easier to look in the rearview mirror. You were talking about our times. You would think the pandemic would have been one of those moments that brought us together, but it did the opposite, of course. We're more divisive than we've ever been. But what are you seeing out there as far as the landscape goes? And we'll move on to the final segment of the show.
Wonderful. So, the media landscape is definitely shifting. I feel like it's by the minute. We've seen a huge surge of interest in podcasts and audio consumption. Obviously, shows like yours are, there's been this big void, I feel like, for a lot of years. And I was looking at it of, okay, well, we've got more and more video content and there's a lot of text and images, but where's the audio piece, especially as people are busy and post-pandemic, more people are commuting again. And I find, at least for myself, I'm trying to not watch videos while I'm driving.
Excellent.
Typically a good thing to do.
Safety is important.
But I listen to podcasts all the time. And it's trying to find content that really fits into people's daily lives. That's where so much of it is headed. Like you say, you're trying to get away from a lot of the ads. The ads that really stick with people are those that don't even seem like ads.
Oh, yeah.
That they're native, they're helpful, they actually provide value to what you're doing. It's branded content. It's something that gives you value in an interactive way. And that's where we're seeing a lot of that go, especially as privacy comes into play in a lot bigger way. whether it's, laws or, Apple's ATT, app tracking transparency rules. Suddenly it's getting harder and harder because of that privacy for advertisers to say, okay, I know what Blake wants. I'm going to give Blake these individual things, and let's make sure that he's seeing our ads everywhere. It doesn't work like that as much anymore. And so you've got to find new ways of connecting and making sure that you're actually providing value to an end user, to an end consumer. Because you've got so many choices in your media consumption. An old friend of mine used to say, it used to be that I would see an ad or I would see a piece of content, and I would pay attention to it for a few seconds and then move on to the next thing. Probably wouldn't really remember it. But now with so much flying at me, it doesn't even enter my ear and go out the other. It just goes around my head. Nice. I ignore it. I don't even see it. It's not even there. You've got to figure out how to break through, grab someone's attention and hold on for dear life. And you do that not by being annoying or, distracting them from what they want, but actually adding value and helping people provide more of that sense of fulfillment, or helping them to get from point A to point B as seamlessly, as efficiently as possible with your help as a trusted brand or counselor or service provider.
Well said. We are overexposed as a populace, so to find a way to break through, that's the golden ticket, right? Awesome. Well, as we close today, you talked about your family briefly. The one child?
So got two now. Two girls.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Got Samantha is 6 and Abigail just turned 1. Awesome. So I'm a girl dad. Love it. Wonderful family. We put down roots here in Tallahassee, and life is wonderful.
Awesome.
And and it'll say it's given me a redefined perspective on priorities. I think as parents typically find, and that's, I think, also helped a lot with running our farm and making sure, especially post-pandemic, providing flexibility, providing options to where people are able to not be exclusively focused on work, on the office, but to be able to enjoy that balance. You don't want to live to work, you want to work to live. That's something that Ron Sachs has said as one of his Ronisms for many years that I've really loved to hear, because it's true.
Ronism, I like that. That's great.
And so it's just important. I feel like if the pandemic has done anything, it's made us all rethink what really matters in life and make sure that we're able to be, we want to, at Sachs Media, we want to be, the work family, but it's important to have that balance of work family and actual family, because they can coexist. And that's, we've gone a lot more virtual, post-pandemic. We figured out how it all works. Your team has been very helpful in making that happen, making it so that we can go virtually and still be extremely successful. And I think in many cases even be more successful and efficient than we've ever been, and effective than we've ever been before. But it's figuring out that, and we're all doing it, and it's an exciting ride.
Yeah, the pendulum is swinging all over the place. We track our billable hours at the company, so it's interesting to look at 2022 hours versus, say, 2019 hours. And someone that might bill 6 hours a day is now billing 8 hours a day. And I'm thinking, are you taking a lunch break? Are you slowing down at all? And when people have that work-life balance that you mentioned, they throw more into their work. They throw more into their family. Time and balance becomes an art form and easier to do if you do have a little bit of flexibility.
Absolutely.
And I think our nation had been searching for that from an economic perspective. When I worked at the Omni in Atlanta between music business and technology, I asked for 15 minutes to go to the doctor, and they're like, that's probably a no-go.
Wow.
And I'm like, are you kidding? Like, and I'm like, well, it's probably going to take longer than 15 minutes. I have to get in the interstate. Like, yeah, you should probably do that on the weekend. They're not open on the weekend. Anyway, you all have a great corporate culture, and it's a pleasure to work with an organization like Sachs Media. So last question. You talked about history, and I'm also a history buff. So what would be an event in the history of our world, any event at all that you could attend? What would you throw out there?
So I love, while I really have, I've tried to learn other languages, failed miserably learning Spanish for many years, actually went to school in Miami for a stint and just never clicked. I still love the concept of language and writing. And so going all the way back to Sumerians, for instance, 3000 BC, they were really the first written language, and they were one of the first cultures and societies that figured out how to take language and transfer it from generation to generation. And just, I would love to see the light bulbs click for people to go, wow, we can pass on this wealth of knowledge to others and continue and build on our culture and our collective history. Because that's rewritten the world as we know it.
Awesome. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that is the Biz and Tech podcast for today. Thank you, Ryan, so much for being here. Your team at Sachs Media, they're rock stars. Thank you for joining us. Check out Magic Mind for your nootropics need, and we will see you next time on the podcast. I'm Blake Dowling, CEO of Aegis Business Technologies. Have an awesome and spectacular day. Take care.